Hello everybody, my name is Bede. I'm a student of Vedanta and I live in Australia, and I'm here with Kevin. Introduce yourself, Kevin.
Hello everybody, my name is Kevin, also a student of Vedanta.
Yep, and what our teacher is, her name is Swami Atmaprakashananda, and what we're going to be doing is a conversation about Vedantic practice. And fundamentally the result of this Vedanta practice. So what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about what an attitude is, and particularly attitudes, problematic attitudes, attitudes of the unhappy attitudes that we can find ourselves enclosed in every day. So what happens is that sometimes we can feel angry, we can be angry, we can be sad, we can be bored, we can be annoyed. All of these being words is an attitude. Okay, so often we can be unhappy, and we're going to discuss how we find ourselves being enclosed in these attitudes, but more importantly, how do we shift from these attitudes to an attitude that's free of this unhappiness, which is always in the form of an attitude. Okay, and we're going to look at that process of what Swami Dayananda means by transformation, and how this is related to his understanding of of the term Ishwara. How does that sound, Kevin?
Sounds very good. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, now let's just start with a common example. Kevin, have you ever been angry?
Indeed, I have been angry. I've been very angry at times.
Okay. Now, particularly if, say, we've been ripped off, or we feel we've been ripped off. Now, when you're being angry, do you notice that it takes up all the room?
If you mean by, I can think one example is more clear to me in this situation, where there's an idea that comes in, and that I see an idiot, and I could dismiss that and treat them as a normal person, but if I don't do that and that same idea comes through, like, I don't think I've got an idea that I'm experiencing an idiot, and right. I'm completely enclosed in that attitude.
Yes, right, because you see, that's a very interesting point, because an attitude actually is a way of seeing. That at any one moment, I'm involved in a way of seeing, and that is being expressed as an attitude. It is an attitude, that way of seeing. So, for example, if I dislike you, if I have an attitude towards you and I dislike you, I don't like you, I think you're this or that, right? That's going to be conveyed, isn't it?
Yeah.
By my tone of voice, by my physical posture, everything. Now, I may, of course, be polite. Kevin, how are you? But basically, fundamentally, I have an attitude, an unfriendly attitude that I am. Okay?
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Oh, so the attitude is a way of seeing, you said there.
Yeah, and but what's important in terms of Vedanta, a way of seeing is a way of being. It's not like you have a separate little way of seeing. That the way you are seeing is the way you are being. Okay, so like, for example, if I look at the world, we see the fundamental attitudes of a human being is attitudes towards myself, attitudes towards other people, and attitude towards the world. Right? So at any one moment, I'm always in an attitude.
Yeah.
And this attitude is a way of seeing, which is a way of being. Like, and this can chop and change. Have you ever, for example, with your spouse, been upset with your spouse, but the next day you're fine with her?
Yes, I've experienced that, Bede.
Well, notice how there's a change. There's a shift from one attitude to another attitude.
Yeah.
Now, when you're getting on well with your spouse, are you seeing her differently than the way you were seeing her when you were angry?
I think there's a substantial difference there.
Yes, you're no longer talking in a terse voice. You're friendly. So what happens is that the attitude that we're always in an attitude. We can't help but be in an attitude, and this attitude chops and changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're in one attitude in one moment, and we're in another attitude the next moment. Someone rings up and tells us that we've won lotto. There's a sudden shift, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The thing is that, so what happens is that when we're talking about an attitude, when we're talking about anger, the important thing is that an attitude is not something we have. It is something we are. Now, when I first went to India and I was talking to Swami Dayananda, I was particularly interested in this whole subject. I asked him, well, what do you mean by attitude? And he said that attitude is the individual. So the attitude that I am at any one moment is me.
What do you mean when, just going back to, you said attitude isn't something I have, it's something I am. What can you explain that?
Well, in the West, we tend to think, we say that person's got a bad attitude. He has a bad attitude. Or we think attitude is something that we can do, or is something we have, or something we can do. Like, oh, I'm going to adopt a positive attitude. Do you know what I mean? Or in the West we talk about anger management, as if anger is an entity separate from the individual that the individual is suffering from. Swami Dayananda has an entirely different view on it. He's saying that the angry attitude is the individual. The individual is being the anger. Being the anger.
Yeah, that's different. That's very different.
Absolutely, because what happens is, you see, when you're being the anger, you can't help but feel angry thoughts. You can't help but have angry thoughts. You can't help but have angry feelings. You can't help but have physiological reactions of your jaw being tense, your fists is closed and all this, and you can't help but act that anger out if it takes up all the room. So when you're being angry, what happens is that you're enclosed in an attitude. But Swami Dayananda says a very interesting thing. We don't choose this. He gives an example. He says, try now. I want you now to be angry at me right now. You don't choose the attitude you find yourself in. You just simply find yourself being in an attitude. But you don't choose the attitude.
So it's out of, you're saying the attitude's out of your control?
Yeah. Yep, you never choose an attitude. You find yourself being in an attitude, and that attitude depends on how you're seeing things. That's what it depends upon, how you are seeing things. Like if you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, it's a great day, right?
Yes.
If you're seeing that way, what happens to what kind of thoughts arise in your mind?
Happy thoughts, looking forward to the day, or
Yep. Do you feel reasonably relaxed?
Feel relaxed, happy.
Yep.
Interactions are happy.
Okay. Now imagine you wake up and you go, my God, life sucks.
I think there'll be a lot of unhappy thoughts if that's what's occurring.
Yes, because you see, what happens is that our way of seeing is our way of being. At any one moment, we are seeing. We're always involved in a way of seeing. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Always. That's a rule. And this is why actually Vedanta works, because if the way of seeing is transformed, guess what happens to the attitude?
It gets transformed.
Can't help it. It's like a law. All right. So now I've picked is anger. So what we're talking about here is an unhappy attitude, aren't we?
Yeah.
Now, there are many unhappy attitudes that we can be involved with. Have you noticed that?
I think there's, yes, I concur with that.
Yeah. So what happens is that we can feel, we can be have a sad attitude. We can be a bored attitude. We can be an anxious attitude. We can be anxious, which is being anxious is an attitude of anxiety. Do you know what I mean? So we can be our anxiety, we can be sad, we can be angry, we can be annoyed, we can be. Notice I'm using these words be.
Yes.
That's what I mean by attitude.
Mm.
So what happens is it's something we be. You see what I mean?
So there's no time that we aren't an attitude.
No, we can't know. As an individual living in the world, we are always in an attitude. But let's say this. We're either enclosed in an attitude or abiding in an attitude. We're going to go into that. Okay? But we're, generally speaking, we're always in an attitude. But unhappy attitudes we're enclosed in. We can't get out of them. Have you ever been in a mood that's an unhappy mood that you just sort of can't get out of?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, like what I mean is that when we're unhappy, often we can't just say, "Oh, I'm just going to snap out of this."
Mm.
When you're angry with someone or a situation, or you're worried about something, it's not subject to our will. We can't just go, "Oh, I'm not going to be worried."
Mm. Mm. Can you choose an attitude then?
No, we can't. We can't choose attitudes.
Okay.
No, I'll go into that.
Mm-hmm.
Because an attitude is a consequence of how we're seeing.
Mm.
It's the natural, spontaneous consequence of how we're seeing, because it is a way of seeing embodied.
Mm.
So what happened? See, our Swami said the other night that what happens is that in Vedanta we don't try and deal with all of these different forms of unhappiness. We deal with the anger, now we're going to deal with the anxiety, now we're going to deal with the sadness. We don't do that, because what we do is with the fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is centered on us. In other words, we are being unhappy. That takes many forms. It manifests as many different attitudes. Does that make sense? But fundamentally, we are being unhappy.
Mm.
And for example, have you ever been bored? Have you ever been enclosed in boredom?
Yes, I've experienced boredom.
Right. So when you're being bored, have you noticed you can't just go, "Oh, I'm not bored. I won't be bored. I've decided I'm going to think positive. Have you ever tried not to be bored?"
No, not from boredom. It seems that it's pervasive there.
Yes, but that is a form of unhappiness.
Mm.
See,
how do you see it as a form of unhappiness?
When is it pleasant being bored? Is it something you love being?
No.
Okay, so you're being bored, aren't you? You're being the boredom.
Mm.
Now, often we actually don't recognize the attitude that we're in, because we say, "Well, I'm vacuuming the house. I can't help but be bored. Vacuuming makes me bored."
Mm. Yeah.
Does that make sense? I mean, it's as if the vacuuming makes me bored.
Yes, that's how I see it.
Sorry?
I think I think I've experienced that.
Yes.
Or washing up or whatever.
Washing up, yeah. It's these are boring activities. But what Swami Dayananda says is, no. The problem is that you are being bored. You are being boring. You are being that. It is not. So what happened is, when you are doing dishes, that triggers being bored. When you're doing the vacuuming, that triggers being bored.
Can't I say that the washing up is boring?
Well, it's not a matter of saying. It's that what we're doing is we feel that the problem is the washing up. we think that the washing up is causing our boredom.
Mm.
Whereas what Swami Dayananda says, the washing up is just simply an action.
Mm.
The problem is me. I am being bored while washing up.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm actually busy, not just washing up, but being bored.
I'm full of myself as being bored.
Mm. Well, it sounds horrible when you speak of it like that.
Yeah, but it's just simply what it is that we are always being an attitude, and often we are being an unhappy attitude. So we're being unhappy. So being unhappy means, now this is very important, means being enclosed in an attitude. And I use the word enclosed because we don't choose it. We just find ourselves being unhappy in certain ways, don't we? What about when your spouse says something you don't like? Have you ever, or does something you don't like? Have you ever become, have you ever become, in the emphasis of the word, have you ever become annoyed with it?
Yes, I admit that, Bede. I've experienced that.
Right, everyone does. Does that make sense? So everyone has, the problem we're talking about, everybody has.
Mm.
Now, what the interesting thing is how Swami Dayananda clarifies it.
Mm.
You see what it means. So what does it mean when I'm angry? Well, I could say, well, what it means is that my wife is doing things I don't like. And if she had stopped doing them, I wouldn't be angry. So that's what it means to me. But in the light of Vedanta, what happens is my wife has done something or said something I don't like. That triggers an attitude, and I find myself being angry or annoyed. And the problem is that it's centered on me. The unhappiness is centered on me. I am being unhappy with my wife. But you see, I don't necessarily see it that way. I don't recognize, because you see, without the teaching, we won't be able to see it this way. Our problem is what I am being. It is the attitude of annoyance or anger.
Well, why can't you say it's still, even if if it's centered on you, why can't you say it's still your wife's fault or problem? No. Because what you're doing is that people do things that we don't like and say things we don't like. Is that true? Yes.
That's going to happen for the rest of our lives. Right? And what happens is we notice this. We notice that they say and do something we don't like. Suddenly we find ourselves being angry, right?
Yeah.
So we then assume that they've caused me to be this way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That's the experience.
Yes, that's my experience.
That is a way of seeing. We're looking at this experience in a certain way, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's a way of seeing. She has hurt me. She is being mean or cruel. Right? Now, when I'm seeing her that way, and also she has made me angry. She's
made me unhappy.
She's made me unhappy. Now, if that's true, you can't help but have very strong feelings of antagonism or anger towards her. Because you're enclosed in a way of seeing, which is a way of being. It's simultaneous.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So, but what Swami Dayananda says that what's happened is that there is an attitude that's become active, right? And this attitude, you are at that moment. So right here, right now, I am being angry. And so I am being unhappy, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that I can't be happy until she says sorry. Have you ever had that experience?
At least stop whatever my good wife might be doing or saying.
Yes, because we feel that our happiness is dependent on that person because they've caused our unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
But what Swami Dayananda is saying is, no. The problem is that you are being unhappy. And there is an attitude. There's an attitude of unhappiness. In this case, it's anger, or it might be annoyance. So what happens is that in life, we often find ourselves in various forms of unhappiness. Would you say that's true?
Yeah.
And what happens is this, as far as Swami Dayananda is concerned, this unhappiness, which is built in us from past experiences, unhappy experiences and all that, are constantly being triggered as attitudes. The weather might trigger an attitude. Oh, damn it, I hate this. It's cold weather. So this unhappiness is being triggered all the time. We think the problem exists with people and circumstances.
Yeah, I think that would be the common view.
But what he's saying the location of the suffering is our being unhappy.
But it was triggered by the external event,
but there's not cause.
Husband, wife.
Not caused though. No. It says when a person gets angry, they were already angry beforehand. It doesn't just have it lies entirely with them. You see, the suffering is me. That's one issue. That's not denying what the other person done. The person might steal or rob you. That's an unpleasant action, isn't it?
Yes.
But that external event. Now, this is the very, very solid Vedantic principle. The external event is not the basis of the unhappiness. So the situation or the person's actions are not the basis of unhappiness. The basis of unhappiness is I am being unhappy. I am taking being unhappy and myself as one and the same. It's a condition of the individual. The individual is being the unhappiness. It's an attitude. And if you look at what an attitude is, it's a psychophysical posture, isn't it?
What do you mean by that, psychophysical?
It has mental components and has physical components that blend together.
So
it's not just a little thought in my head. When I'm angry, the tone of voice is there, the physical expressions are there, the thoughts are there, the feelings are there. It's a totality, isn't it?
So the thoughts to do with psychological and the blood pressure, physiological, they're all going to conform to that attitude. Yes,
so that's a very good point. What happens is that when we're thinking, when we're angry, the psychological functions, right, of thinking, feeling, physiological reactions and actions, behavior, are completely in conformity. They can't help but be in conformity with the attitude. In Western psychology, what they do is they try and deal with the thoughts maybe, or they try and deal with the feelings or whatever. But Swami Dayananda says, no. The only way to deal with an attitude is you have to shift away from it into another one. Do you see what I mean? Now, this is what you see, but most of our attitudes are unconscious. They've been formed in us unconsciously. And they become active today. You see, what happens is that by the time we're 6, we're fairly established in how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how we see others. And that from that point on, what happens is that that the way we were emotionally when we were 6 is on continuing even into adult life. Swami Dayananda says that most adults have a psychological age of 6. They're emotionally immature because, in other words, we're reactive. And it's very difficult to live, to solve and deal with adult problems with infantile reactions. Have you noticed that?
Yes. So can you just explain a bit more what you mean by reactions or reactivity? Or
okay, what happens is that in Vedanta we consider unhappiness as a reaction. In other words, we don't choose to be unhappy. We just find it reacts. We suddenly find ourselves being angry or being sad or being lonely or being uptight or being annoyed. We don't choose this. What happens is that something happens and suddenly, bang, we find ourselves. There's a reaction.
Are all our actions reactions, or is there a different type of...
I'm going to go into that, yes, but at the moment I'm talking about reactions.
Yeah.
Sometimes we find ourselves being non-reactive, that's true, but we're not going to deal with it. At the moment, I want to just concentrate on the fact that a lot of our lives, we find that one of the fundamental things with human beings is that they're often unhappy. Is that true?
I think the basis of what most people are doing most of my life is my interests, my desires are there to if I look at it, it's because I think that those desires or those will resolve unhappiness.
Yes. Well, how Swami Dayananda puts it is that people are unhappy and they're trying to be happy. And they're trying to be happy because they're unhappy. Do you see what I mean? So a lot of this whole effort. So what happens is that constantly what's happening is that we are being triggered.
Yeah.
This unhappiness that is us is constantly taking various forms: annoyance, anxiety, sadness, arrogance, inferiority, you name it. All of these various attitudes that come active in us, all these, you see, but what's important for us to understand that unhappiness is an attitude. We feel that we suffer from it. That something outside is called unhappiness. We're suffering from unhappiness, don't we? What he's saying is that we are being unhappy.
It could be because just going back, you talked about this being established, and by the time someone's 6, are you saying that we're naturally unhappy?
I don't want to go into that now. Let's just talk about the fact that we often find ourselves being unhappy.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we look at our life, right, we can get up in the morning. Have you ever sometimes been just feeling a little bit off?
Yeah.
You notice you can't just snap out of it, can you? It's just there.
Yeah.
We have no choice over this. We just find ourselves being a little bit off.
Yeah.
Right here, right now, as I am, I find myself being unhappy. Now, I might do various things to try and get rid of that. I might have a drink. I might turn on television. I might try and manipulate other people and the environment so I can feel happier. But the problem is that my problem is I am being unhappy. I'm enclosed in an attitude which pervades me as an individual. I'm enclosed. It's like fenced in.
And I can't. And you're saying that's my problem when I'm angry. It's not whatever triggered it.
No, absolutely not. Never. Never. What you see, this is the primary delusion. Swami Atmaprakashananda thinks that the understanding of this fact is the beginning of emotional maturity. The beginning, because it is actually, in fact, one of the major hurdles even to begin, because we're so used to feeling that I'm upset because I'm getting older. I'm upset because people aren't treating me the right way. I'm upset because things, I wasn't successful at this. You see what I mean? We've got all reasons to be unhappy that we think are reasons for our unhappiness, and they're all external, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, what Swami Dayananda says is no. The unhappiness is centered on you. The basic problem of the human being is not external. It is not other people or situations. It is the individual. I, as an individual, am being unhappy. I am being an attitude of unhappiness. Does that make sense? So,
yeah.
And the whole purpose of Vedanta is to shift from being unhappy to being free while living. Now, we have a lot of experience of being unhappy while living, haven't we?
Yeah.
But the whole point is to be able to be free while living. Now,
well, good.
Sorry?
Well, that sounds very good.
Yeah.
For a minute there, I thought I was doomed to only unhappy attitudes, and I was.
Yes. Well, again, notice the language. It's not the unhappy attitudes that are causing you the pain. It's you being the unhappy attitudes. You see, what we do is we externalize the problem.
Yes.
We even make the mind the problem. Now, I've been trained formally in Western psychology. Now, I used to think the mind was the problem. And then I read something by Swami Dayananda, and he said, the mind never ever says to you, I'm unhappy. You are unhappy about the mind.
Yes, that sounds very interesting.
Well, I mean, I was flabbergasted when I read this, because all the basis of my training was that when people are unhappy, there's a person and they're having problems with unhappiness. It's something they have. But the radical difference between Western psychology and Vedanta is no. The unhappiness is you. You are being unhappy. You are enclosed in an attitude of unhappiness.
So I can justify that unhappiness or attribute to an external object, but you're talking that it's even if I can attribute it, the actual problem is I'm being unhappy.
The real problem, and this is the brilliance of Swami Dayananda, the way he articulates, is that he says that you are the problem. The other side of the equation is you are also the solution, which we're going to go into. But at the moment, I'm just dealing with you are the problem.
Because life is full of circumstances and events which aren't comfortable or are both comfortable and uncomfortable. And if every time I meet an uncomfortable, unpleasant one, I'm going to be unhappy, well, it's seems a pretty silly place to be.
Swami Dayananda said it's like an emotional yo-yo. You see, what he says is that the fundamental problem of a human being is insecurity and self-dissatisfaction. And so what happens is that and it's being self-dissatisfied. I am unhappy. That is self-dissatisfied, isn't it? I'm unhappy with me.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that make sense? I'm unhappy.
Yeah.
I'm happy. So insecurity. I'm unhappy being insecure. So it's always, you see, it's a very fundamental fact, this, but it must be thoroughly understood that when I really see that my problem, my suffering, whenever I see, if I look at my suffering or my problem of human unhappiness in the light of Vedanta, which is what we need to do if we want to see it in the right way. When I look at my suffering in any form, let's say I find myself being annoyed, right?
Yeah.
The wonderful thing about Vedanta is you can suddenly, because you've been exposed to the teaching, you go, here I am being unhappy again. I'm being unhappy. But I must understand the nature and structure of the unhappiness. Because if I think that the unhappiness has been caused by something outside of me, then I can't help but obsessively try and control those factors. That's why we
and change it or reverse it or whatever.
And we get obsessive about this. That's why husbands and wives try to control each other. You know what I mean? Your job is to make me happy. No, my job is to make, no, your job is to make me happy. So what happens is that because we are involved in that, what happens is every time they don't do what we don't want, the unhappiness that we want them to protect us from rears its head.
And what's the basis of that unhappiness? You said self-dissatisfaction and insecurity.
Yeah, no, it's not the basis of, but that is the unhappiness. We're not getting the basis yet. What happens is that when I say, let's say someone comes into the psychotherapist's office and goes, I'm just miserable. They're saying, I am miserable. Right? So they're self-dissatisfied. They're saying, I am unhappy and I don't like it. Do you see what I'm saying? So what happens is, what I want to make clear here is that unhappiness is this. I am unhappy about the way I am being. I'm self-dissatisfied, aren't I? I have a dissatisfaction centered on myself. That's the real problem. But most people don't recognize that it's self-dissatisfaction is their problem. They think it's unsatisfactory behavior of other people or unsatisfactory situations.
Yeah. So
what we're looking at is that often we are being unhappy. Now the whole endeavor of Vedanta is what it does is it enables a person to appreciate what it means to be free while living. That's the whole point. Because if I'm being happy, I'm no longer being unhappy.
So you're saying being free and being happy are the same thing?
Yes. Well, what we're going to do is we go into these conversations, we're going to find that being free, being happy, being objective, being ourselves, and being aware are all one and the same. Because this is an interesting point you bring up. Swami Dayananda says that a wise person is one who's happy in themselves as themselves because of themselves. So a wise person isn't somebody who knows all about Vedanta, who knows all about the Upanishads and all about the Bhagavad Gita. For Swami Dayananda, a wise person is one who is happy in himself because of what he is. Does that make sense? And he says, He says, if you're not wise, you're otherwise.
so implied in what you just said there is that he's saying that I'm naturally happy, and that's why it's never acceptable to me to be unhappy.
Now, what he's saying, well, not quite. It's more that when you come to appreciate, which is what we mean by knowledge, right? When you come to appreciate what happiness is and abide in that unhappiness while living, right?
Abide in that happiness while living. Yep.
Yeah, abide in that happiness while living. You first of all got to appreciate what happiness is. And first of all, he says we have to appreciate this in a relative way, not an absolute way. You can't just go bang. So first of all, we have to be able to appreciate what does it mean to be happy, relatively speaking, and abide in that appreciation while living. And when you are being happy in the sense that he means it, right? You are being wise. So it's a very interesting thing, isn't it? So that if I'm miserable or if I'm angry, can I say that at that moment, am I wise?
No, you're being otherwise.
Even if I do know all about the Gita and I know all about the Upanishads and all that stuff, it means nothing.
No.
I am being unwise. Now the whole point of Vedanta is a shift from being unhappy, right?
Yeah.
To being enclosed in unhappy attitudes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To abiding in an attitude which is relatively free and relatively happy. That's the practice of Vedanta. It's not the absolute goal, but we can't appreciate absolute freedom unless we know what it is to be free, relatively speaking.
So we're talking about the initial but essential part of Vedanta, which is preparation of the mind.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the transformation of attitude. Now,
which is karma yoga. I think Swami Dayananda says yoga is attitudes and values.
Yes, but I'll go into that in a minute. But what I'm saying is we're talking about the transformation, right? Transformation means across, going from one form to another form.
Yeah.
So when I'm enclosed in an unhappy attitude, that's one form of me as an individual. I'm in one form, aren't I?
Yes.
This is the form I am being as an individual. Transformation means going from one form where I'm enclosed in unhappiness to being happy.
Well, looking forward to that transformation.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that this is not some fly-by-night mystical or magical thing. This is quite practical. It's quite practical to discover what it means to be happy, relatively speaking, to abide in that happiness while living. And the way we put it is that we perform actions with proper attitude. But we're going to go into that. But what I wanted just to talk about this morning was to really, really look at what we're dealing with. So just to kind of sum up, we're dealing with the fact that we're dealing with an attitude. We're dealing with subject matter of what does it take? What is necessary to transform the attitude that we're enclosed in and unhappy in some way, to abide in an attitude where that unhappiness does not exist. Now, this is very important. We want to discover and appreciate an attitude where these various forms of unhappiness that often we feel afflicted by does not exist.
Well, that sounds like a pretty big transformation, Bede.
Well, it's the primary one, actually. It's the first one, right? But and what we're going to find, which we're going to be going into next time, this is not possible without an understanding of what Swami Dayananda means by Ishwara. It's just not possible. So what we're saying here is that, you see, an interesting thing he says, we have to learn to appreciate the presence of God as a fact. We have to learn to appreciate God as a fact to be appreciated.
That's a big statement.
Yes, and we're going to go into that because it's this appreciation, this understanding of God as a fact to be appreciated, right? Which brings about what is born out of this appreciation of God as Swami Dayananda unfolds God or Ishwara, right?
Yeah.
What is born out of that is an attitude, right? An attitude that frees us, relatively speaking, from all these other forms of these attitudes that of unhappiness. And that's what I want to go into next time. But I wanted just to say, we see, we're not going to value this unless we can understand that we're often caught in and enclosed in unhappy attitudes.
I think that's true.
Constantly.
Yeah.
You see, because we're not going to value the cure unless we see we have the disease.
Yes.
And you see, and the disease, basically, he says what the disease is, it's emotional immaturity.
Even for a 60-year-old. We're talking about emotional immaturity for a 50, 60-year-old, aren't we?
Yes. If I am being unhappy and I'm blaming external events, my mind, other people, or the world for this unhappiness, I am emotionally immature. So can I make a confession here, Kevin?
Yes.
I am an emotionally immature individual who's extremely interested in this Vedanta and particularly Karma Yoga, because Karma Yoga is complete, as unfolded by Swami Dayananda, is the method that can remedy my emotional immaturity, which I have plenty of.
Very good, Bede.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Have you got anything to add before we go?
I think you've made it very clear that we're talking about abiding in an attitude where unhappy attitudes do not exist. Yes,
you could say that there is an attitude that we can discover, which is, for me, was probably the greatest psychological event in my life. Is there's an attitude that right here, right now, as we are, we can abide in, and what it does is that this attitude is the attitude in which all these unhappy attitudes that often become relatively resolved.
And further to that, we'll understand why the limitations are very clearly of those unhappy attitudes. So they're not going to be seen as equivalent and different. We're talking about they'll be seen as silly.
Well, no, we won't see them as silly because we don't use terms like that. They're quite lawful. Given our ignorance of the proper attitude.
Yeah.
Proper means property, ownership, own, you know what I mean? So that belonging. So there is an attitude that belongs to this vision of God. Swami Dayananda unfolds, right?
Yeah.
And this attitude that's born of that vision, does that make sense?
Yeah.
This, when we're abiding in that attitude, at any one moment, right here, right now, as we are, what happens is the suffering becomes inactive. The other attitudes become inactive. And that's what's important, and that's what we're going to discuss. And this attitude, he has a beautiful expression, which we're going to go into, being relaxed in the lap of Ishvara.
Excellent.
But we'll go into it. Okay, Kevin, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bede.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.